This video is sponsored by Festool.
Building a kitchen from scratch is intimidating. There's a lot of elements, and in some ways, building a small kitchen is harder than building a big one because every inch is valuable. Since we started remodeling our 1940 bungalow, I've been designing our 140 square foot kitchen. I've made hundreds of iterations, and although I'm not sure the design is done, I am ready to start building. When making a kitchen, you can of course go with base cabinets that are purchased from manufacturers like IKEA, and while they get the job done, those cabinets are made of particle board, which breaks down over time. They also limit how original you can be with your designs, and I want a truly bespoke kitchen. To do this, I can either hire a cabinet company or do what I'm doing today, which is build them myself. This week, I'm covering the basics on designing and building cabinets, including tips and tricks for efficiently managing all the parts. We're also gonna tour one of the coolest bespoke kitchen design companies in Seattle, Kerf Design, pick their brains and see if I can make improvements on my kitchen. The goal for this week is to build the base cabinets and try and get all the carcasses and toe kicks in place so I can get a glimpse of how this kitchen is gonna look in the end. So before we get too deep into the build, I quickly wanted to talk about design. This is something that I don't really talk about that often on this channel, but most things go through SketchUp for all of my furniture builds. 3D modeling programs have pretty much replaced the old drafting tables, which is the way people used to design furniture. And I still keep a sketchbook, but when it comes to keeping track of different measurements, this is just much more efficient. Now, there are loads of other options other than SketchUp. I'm sure people can mention in the comments ones that they recommend. I just learned this a long time ago. It served me well. It's got a low barrier to entry, and it's pretty affordable.
I start my design by making a lot of cubes, one for the oven, one for the dishwasher, and one for the fridge. These are the elements that are the easiest to find homes for, and personally, I like the dishwasher, sink, and oven to be in a line, with the sink centered in between the two and centered on the window. This way, I can enjoy the view while I'm doing the dishes. You've probably heard about the kitchen triangle. This is a way to organize your workflow and minimize the amount of steps you take while you cook. Basically, you don't want any obstructions between the sink, fridge, and oven. This is why a lot of people, myself included, like a galley-style kitchen because these elements are really close to each other and there's no way to obstruct them.
I have this book. It's called the Visual Handbook of Building and Remodeling, and it's great for a lot of things. In this case, it's really good to look through the kitchen design guidelines. This will give you like the spacing between workstations, how much passage you need, spacing between chairs, the distance for upper cabinets, all the odds and ends, because when you work with a 3D modeling software, it's really hard to judge proportion.
Now, once you have the appliances in place, the rest of the job is just to stitch in cabinets, and this has a lot to do with personal preference and what you own and what you like to keep in your kitchen. And Ashley and I made a checklist of all the things that we needed to keep in all of the cabinets, and we made sure that we had room for each and everything, along with some room to expand.
Once I have the kitchen all cubed out, I could then create all the joinery and break that down into panels, and then I can build a cut list from there. I personally like to color code all the panels for the cabinets, which I'll bring through the build so I don't get confused. I'll show you more of the anatomy of these cabinets as we get into it, but for now, let's get in the wood shop and start building.
This is a material that's generally referred to as Prefin or pre-finished plywood. You can get it at a lot of lumber yards, and a lot of cabinet makers use it as their standard for interiors of cabinets. Now, it's not the best looking stuff, but it is incredibly strong, and it definitely saves you a lot of time because you don't have to spend time finishing the insides of cabinets. So I got this tip from my buddy Jason Bent from Bent's Woodworking. He said to rip cut all of the panels first and then apply edge banding before you do anything else, which is brilliant because then you cut everything to length and everything's already edge banded. In the past, I've just hand trimmed all of my edge banding like a fool. You may notice that I have a new track saw in the shop. This is the Festool TSV60KEB. It's got a kickback stop and it's got an extra blade in it, which I'm gonna show you what that does in a minute. Before that, I'm prepping for this edge banding. I mark every edge that I cut so that I know which side to glue it onto. So the lumber that I'm gonna be using for the edge banding is white oak. This comes from Woodworker's Source. It's my first time mail ordering lumber, and I think it's kind of an interesting way to do it. They supply a whole bunch of lumber stacked into the boxes, and they're sanded on two sides, so they're S2S. All I had to do was use my track saw to trim a clean edge and rip that into strips. Now, I'm not a monster. I'm not using all of this white oak for edge banding. I just picked the least attractive board in the mix. This one had a bit of sapwood in it, but honestly, they all looked pretty darn good. When I rip edge banding for a project like this, I like to go at least a 1/4 inch thick, which may be a lot thicker than most people are used to who use iron-on edge banding. I like this because it lays flat during the glue up and you don't have to worry about getting any sort of ripples in it. I also think it looks pretty good, and if you ever want to round over the edges or do some sort of trim treatment with a router, you've got enough material to do that. Now I made one mistake, which is I didn't cross-cut this board before I started, which means these ends aren't square, but that's easily fixed with a little scrap piece of plywood and the hold down on my KAPEX. So a lot of you probably remember that I spent a good bit of time rebuilding my shop right before I started this project. And I knew I was about to build a kitchen, and I did it intentionally. So I added in, this is a screw vise from Rockler. It's just a game changer in the shop. And so I couldn't believe how useful it was throughout building these cabinets. Definitely paid off in the end, having both the new miter station and the new workbench. If you're interested in watching those videos, I'll post a link right here. I also have plans for both the miter station and the workbench, and those are on my website, almfab.com/plans. So the lumber that I got is only 6 feet long, and these panels are 8 feet long. And so I did my best to match up the white oak and stitch together that seam. But I was able to later on go through my Cordless and divide it up in such a way that there's only, I think, one spot that this seam's gonna be visible, and it's gonna be behind drawer fronts. So really not that visible. Once I got everything edge banded, I had to wait overnight for it to dry, and my buddy Ben invited me to see his new workplace, which is Kerf Design, and we're gonna do a tour, which I think you guys are going to love.
Hey, so we're here at Kerf Designs. They build all sorts of cool furniture, and this is my buddy Ben. He works here as a designer, and he's gonna give us a tour.
So yeah, I mean, general, our workflow is kind of like a horseshoe. Material comes in through the middle here, off the loading dock.
Okay.
We got some puppies in tow here.
Come on.
As you can see down here, we've got our main stacks of plywood. These are all pre-finished, like Baltic birch cores with maple or walnut veneers on them. Get loaded off these stacks here onto the CNC down there. Dan's our CNC guru, does most of the CNC cutting.
I saw him lifting up a panel with those suction cups. Yeah. Those look pretty awesome.
Yeah.
Well, that's
definitely like in the uncanny valley levels of fast.
Yeah, I know, that's what I was gonna say. It's so fast.
It doesn't seem like it should be.
How is that possible?
Able to move that fast, but it does.
Like, are you designing new cabinets for every kitchen, or do you have like a line of cabinets that you're like, we've got 18 inches, 24 inches?
Yeah. It's much more custom than that. I mean, we have standard like dimensions, mostly like depths and heights, you know, fit standard countertops, but every width and the size of the overall cabinet is custom.
Yeah. Oh, so you glue up here. You don't flat pack or anything.
Yeah, and actually this design with the, you know, exposed tenons, kind of the signature Kerf look, was developed so that it could be flat packed and assembled by homeowners.
Okay.
But like the shipping demands of doing that, just like
wasn't
not
really
worth it. Yeah, I feel like a lot of people run into that with the dream of flat pack. And like by the time you dry fit it here, you might as well just glue it up.
Yeah.
Call it good.
So you guys use SketchUp or predominantly? Okay.
Yeah, SketchUp for the 3D modeling. And then it gets pretty complicated once you get into elevations and like taking all of this information to something that the CNC can handle.
Yeah.
It's definitely outside of SketchUp's capability.
So you guys do, this is the joinery that I use on drawers. No dovetail, and it's plenty strong enough, right?
Oh yeah. That's the joinery for our like pull-outs.
Okay.
It's a little bit different from the drawers, which do have the dovetail.
So they're dovetailed this way. They're like, oh, that's a good joint, because then you just need a router bit for it as opposed to a jig and stuff. Ooh,
Riders.
those are pretty.
Yeah, they're usually just like loose in here.
Okay.
These get really fun in the design process because you can make these as detailed and custom as you want. Do you want to see if we can track Nate down?
Yeah.
So I'm making some coffee. Hey Nate. Man, this is all the kerf wall.
Oh, cool.
Lots of fun little features.
Ooh. Oh, I love that hinge. That's so cool.
Hi.
Hey, I'm Michael.
Michael, nice to meet you. Nick.
Nice to meet you too. Thanks for having me.
When we started doing this, it was really good timing making these cabinets because it was sort of my own discovery of mid-century modern stuff. You know,
Yeah.
I'm from New England, so New England. Anything that wasn't, 100 or 200 years old didn't really have as much value in my head growing up, right? And then I moved out to the West Coast and was like, ugh, look at all this ugly, 60s stuff. It took a little while to adjust to, and then I started to just being around it more, started to appreciate it more. And if you turned on your TV in 1998 and a commercial came on for a Cadillac, the Cadillac would pull up in front of some big McMansion, and the successful guy would get out and walk into his, columned entry, and then a year later, the Cadillac was pulling up in front of a 1960s house looking out over the Hollywood Hills, and right at the same time, I was starting to do this stuff, and even though it wasn't really reproduction work, it fit right into those houses from that era.
Yeah.
And every one of them needs to be remodeled.
Yeah.
They're all worn out.
Yeah.
Some of them are already been remodeled. They need to be done again. And so, it's just the right audience at the right time,
Interesting. I don't think I drew that connection with the mid-century modern with your, I just I saw it as a very contemporary look, and it's very cool that I didn't think about it, I can see it working really well in that kind of home. All right.
Yeah, a lot more curves than I'm used to seeing in the models.
I was thinking about it mostly as how do you...
After the shop tour, Ben and Nate were super nice to go through my drawings with me and tell me what advice they have from building hundreds of kitchens over the years. I'm really appreciative of them having me out, letting me see the place and share it with you all. If you want to see more of their work, go check out kerfdesign.com. And if you want to see the full conversation and the full shop tour, I've posted that up on my Patreon.
Yeah, I'll invite you guys over when it's all finished up, and you can survey my work, see what I did well and didn't do so well.
Nice.
Yeah. Yeah, nice to meet you. Thank you.
Back in my workshop, I went into the design software and implemented the changes that were recommended at Kerf. Once I was happy with the new design, I unfolded all of the cabinets and laid them out on 4x8 rectangles, which represent all my sheets of plywood. I then added all the measurements on top, took a screenshot, and printed it off. With the cut list in hand, I can start ripping all these sheets of plywood, and this is where all that prep work pays off, because now I can be confident that that edge-banded front edge is perfectly flat, and I use that up against the fence of the table saw to make the rip. Now, not all these rips are the same width. Some of the cabinets are a little wider than others, and most of those are on the side with the refrigerator, because the refrigerator is a little bit deeper, and I want it to have a nice enclosed look. With all of these prepped, I can now make the first cross cut. And for this, we get to see the new Festool TSV60 KEB in action. And you see it's got a little blade in the front edge that you can turn on and off for cross-cutting, and that's great for this kind of plywood because it can tear out, and that little blade pre-cuts everything so that you just don't get that tear out anymore. The people at Festool have nicknamed it the Perfectionist, which I think is very appropriate. If you have really sensitive materials that you need to worry about, then this is probably the saw for you. Now I'm mostly just need to cross cut these so that I get them down to size so I can get them on the table saw, but these cross cuts are also establishing squareness because since I ripped that front edge, the factory edges are not necessarily square. There are over 30 panels that make up the base cabinets for this kitchen, and keeping track of those can be a bit of a pain. I have in the past messed up cabinets because I've swapped out parts that are like a 1/4 inch different. So having a system to track all the parts is really essential, and the way that I did it on this kitchen was I kept that sheet really close by, marked off things as I went, but I also wrote on the edge what the size was. And then at the very end, I went through and color coded it all. So at a glance, I can tell exactly which panel, which cabinet it goes to. And I carried this through the whole project, which made it a lot easier.
Okay, so I have all of the panels cut to length and height, and I also have them labeled with a color coding mark so that I know which cabinet they go to. This is going to make the whole process a lot easier as I move forward. The next step is to cut the dado track in the back to receive the back panel, and for that, I need to put a dado stack in my table saw.
I got the dado stack set up at a 1/4 inch deep, and I cut a test piece just to check to make sure that it fit snugly onto the plywood that I'm going to be using for the back panels. Once I felt good about the fit, I could then set the fence to the correct depth and cut all the panels down. Now again, all these panels are different widths, so I have to be mindful of that, and this also makes the color coding system really valuable because I can at a glance see which ones are the correct depth and cut all those, and then switch over to the next set and then cut all of them. So I don't want to spoil too much about the upcoming video about what's been going on in the house. A lot of things have been going on in the house, and one of them is allowing us to add this really big cabinet somewhere. That's what I'll give you. If you stick around to the end of the video, I'll explain in more detail because I just can't hide it once we show the inside of the kitchen. But just know that if you're enjoying this series, there's a lot more that we're doing inside the house, and that will be the next episode. In the meantime, I'm cutting down these strips to use as cleats. I didn't have any leftover maple ply, so I had to improvise with the stuff that I had on hand, which is totally fine because none of these pieces are going to get seen. They're just going to support the countertop as well as allow me to screw them into the wall behind them to secure them. So I just used what I had left over in the shop. It was a great way to go through all this extra plywood. And again, everything gets labeled with their measurement as well as color coded to match the cabinet set they're in. A couple of them needed edge banding because they're going to face forward and be seen, but the undersides never will, so you won't see what veneer's on them.
So as you saw, I pre-cut the mortises into the cleats using the domino, and now I have a full cabinet laid out in front of me. This is the 15-inch cabinet. It's for the garbage in the kitchen, and I'm going to pre-assemble it so that I make sure everything lines up, and then I can make the marks for the rest of the dominoes so I can mortise out the rest of the cabinet. So this is the garbage cabinet. It's 15 inches wide. These are the two sides. This is the bottom, and this is the back, and the cleats will hold it all together. This is the most basic of the cabinets. They're gonna get a little bit more complicated from here, but I wanted you to see how these basically go together first, and then we'll get into the more specific details when we get into things like the sink cabinet and the island.
Now, dominoes are by no means the only method of assembling these cabinets. You can certainly use pocket holes or dowels, or even screw them in from the outside if the sides aren't going to be seen. I like using the domino joiner because I have one and I find it's very strong and it's easy to get the panels nice and square. It just works with my system really well. I kind of think of the domino joiner as woodworking cheating. It's so strong, so easy to assemble, and for these cabinets that are probably going to be moved around a fair bit, I know that I can rely on that kind of joinery. If you're not familiar with a domino joiner, this is the tool. It's made by Festool, and it cuts a mortise that's kind of domino shaped, and they make these dominoes that go inside of these holes to form a floating tenon, which is essentially a strong block of wood that connects the two sides together. Now, remember that these are pre-finished panels, so you can't just glue these cabinets together. You have to figure out some form of joinery to hold them together safely. The cleat behind the back panel is for screwing it into the wall, and the cleats on top allow glue surface for the countertop to get glued down to later. And if you're wondering where the toe kick is, I don't like integrated toe kicks. I prefer to build them separate and attach them later because I can level them separately. And we'll get to those at the end of this video, but for now, let's build the rest of these cabinets. So these two cabinets are going to sit to the left and the right of the oven, and they're basically built exactly the same. The Peninsula cabinet, however, is built pretty different in that I was able to eliminate an extra sheet of plywood by making it one solid cabinet as opposed to two that sit next to each other. The problem with that is that it's pretty precarious to assemble. Fortunately, with a couple clamps, I was able to hold everything together and mark it out so I could do the dominoes. Now it gets a little funky where it stitches together because I won't have full depth for the dominoes that I've been using, which means that I'm gonna have to custom make a couple dominoes that are a little bit shorter. I don't think I'll ever get over the satisfaction of assembling a bunch of parts that you spend a ton of time designing and making. It's just great when they all slip together correctly.
So this is the sink cabinet, and you'll notice it's a little different from the other cabinets because it doesn't have this top rail that goes across. The sink is going to be installed fairly close to the front edge of the cabinet, so you'd only get about 1 inch, maybe 3/4 of an inch across here, and that's not very strong. So instead, I'm going to install an apron rail right about here. This will be out of solid white oak to match the rest of the cabinets, and it's going to function not only to hold these edges in the right position, it'll also be a stop for the 2 doors that'll go in front, as well as a place to anchor the flip out tray that's gonna go up about here. The other thing that I haven't installed, obviously, is the back panel, and that's gonna be custom made around all of the plumbing, as well as the electrical that has to go in this cabinet. So for now, I'm gonna leave this cabinet as it is, and come back to it when I go to glue it all together.
The last of the base cabinets is the tall cabinet that's going to go next to the fridge, and I delicately...
Whoa, I can't believe that worked.
Put it together. And then it's just a rinse and repeat of what I've done before, which is mark out all the lines. Essentially, this cabinet is the same as the island cabinet, just a little bit squatter and wider and turned on its end. There is one major difference, which we'll get into the next video when we trim out these cabinets and do all the doors and drawers. That this is actually going to get a face frame, and the rest of the cabinets will be frameless. But again, we'll get into those details in another video. So you guessed it, it is toe kick time, and the toe kicks will never see the light of day. I'll put a trim piece in the front of them as well as the sides of them, so it really doesn't need to be made out of nice material. In order to help with the assembly, I've got some of these Rockler Clampett corner clips, which are really handy for holding these parts together while you're trying to screw and pre-drill everything.
All right, here's a quick tip on how to divide up a bay into even segments. So in this case, I have 3 parts. I will slot all 3 of them into the end, and I will measure this length. Now, if I take that length and I divide it by 4, not 3, because there are going to be 4 separate spaces in between these. If I take that and divide it by 4, that's the space from here to here. So let's do that. So that's 54 inches divided by 4. I'm not great at math, so 54 divided by 4 equals 13.5 inches. Thirteen and a half, 13 and a half, 13 and a half, 13 and a half. Works every time.
Now that technique might seem obvious to some people, but what it takes into account is the thickness of the material without you having to calculate that. And especially if you're working with multiple panels like 15 or 16 and some of them are not the same width. I used to use this technique for hanging picture frames evenly in a room, where I would set all of the picture frames in one corner and measure the rest of the room and then evenly divide that space, and it works like a charm. With all the toe kicks made, I decided to place all the cabinets in the kitchen. I know it's a little bit early to do this, but I wanted to show you how I usually install them. And this is the brilliant thing about having detachable toe kicks, is that you take all your time to level the toe kicks right, And then when you put the cabinets on top, they're already leveled. You're not messing with leveling feet underneath the cabinet, trying to get it just right, laying on your back. It's really a much better way to go. I don't understand integrated toe kicks. It seems like more hassle than it's worth. Once you're done leveling everything out, you attach them usually with pocket hole screws or something like that. You can build in a little integrated cleat. Then you can place the cabinets on top, and they're definitely going to be level now. Usually I will put the toe kicks in after the subfloor has gone in, but before you put in like tile or whatever your final flooring is, and that will get cut around the toe kicks. After that, you apply a skin to the front of it that you can scribe to whatever flooring you're using.
When I was talking to Nate at Kerf, he said that every time that he and his wife have built a kitchen, and they've built a couple of them, they've made the entire thing out of cardboard first. And I honestly think that's a brilliant way to design these spaces, because until you actually interact with the physical cabinets, it's really hard to get a sense of things. As I mentioned before, 3D modeling programs make it really hard to judge proportion. You can end up building something that's way too high up or way too big, and get really far in the design phase, start building it, and then realize you've made a terrible mistake. So that said, I'm really happy with how the cabinets have come along. I'm really happy with how the space feels. Spent a lot of time thinking about it, so it's nice to actually see them in the physical space. Now you'll notice that the house looks a lot different from the last video, and we'll cover that. There's a lot going on. If you want to mention in the comments below what you see that's different from the last video, all that's going to come through in the next one. I'm really excited to share the progress that we've made in this house. I'm also really appreciative of Festool for sponsoring this video. They are a dream sponsor. I love their tools. I've been using them for years, so it's cool to have them helping out on the channel, sending me some cool tools that I can try out and share with you guys. So thanks to Festool. Thanks as always to my Patreon supporters. You guys are the best. If you want to see the full Kerf interview, go check out the Patreon, and I'll catch you in the next one.